Alright, tubes, getting ready to pull the transmission on this thing. If you didn't see the last video, I suggest you check it out. We're going to pull this thing out, so I'm just getting ready here. I already pulled the airbox off of this thing. That gives you a lot of room. And I'll probably leave these coolant lines intact because I don't feel like having to drain the coolant out if I don't have to. But if they really get annoying, then I will take them out of there. And then I just loosened up the axle nuts. They were pretty tight on there. I had to put a pretty big work pipe on there. But just make sure if you're taking those axle nuts off, make sure you get the little indentation. I already loosened this one too, but there's a little indentation they smashed down into that keyway there. You got to make sure you pop that out of there, otherwise you're going to be doing a whole lot of work and not really getting anything done. I'm going to try my best to show you guys what I'm doing with this thing. I wouldn't really call it a how-to. I would consider this video for reference only. But hopefully it'll be helpful, because there's not really anybody out there showing how to pull the transmission on one of these things. At least not that I was able to find. Alright, so let me show you what I'm doing here. Right now I'm trying to get the axles out. That's the first thing I want to do. And so what I did is I loosened up the hub nut some more, and I got a block of wood and a hammer and just tapped it. And you can see now that it's loose, I'll loosen up some more, and I can just tap it with my hand and take this all the way out. Thing's loose now. There's nothing really holding it. I can take the axle and shake it back and forth. So that's loose. So what I'm working on now, turn our light on for you, is in order to get that axle the rest of the way out, we got to slide this whole knuckle out of the way. And the only way that's going to happen is by loosening up our lower ball joint and then taking this through bolt out, and then we can swing everything out of the way and get the axle out. So this is a castle nut here. If you've never done ball joints, there's a big number of videos on YouTube showing you how to do it. But basically what you have is you have a little cotter pin that runs through the nut. And so you got to take that cotter pin out, which I've already done, and then loosen up the nut. And once you get that nut loose, you kind of got to bang on this thing a little bit, pretty hard, and then your ball joint should pop free. And you can tell that it's free now. If I hit this hard enough, you could see it bouncing up and down. So anyway, that's loose. So now I guess I can take that the rest of the way off and then take this through bolt out. Before I take that out, it might not be necessary to drop this control arm any lower than it is. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to lift the whole thing out of here. I already started. So we're going to lift this out and let that come out like that. And now I think, probably can't do it with one hand on camera, but I think I should be able to swing this stuff around out of the way here and get the axle out of there. Alright, so that worked well. No need to drop this control arm down. And so now what I'm doing is I'm working on just popping the axle out of the transmission, and I just about got it all the way out already. I just took my pry bar in here and started prying. So I don't want to do too much more before I get somebody on this end to keep it from flying out. But that's about all there is to pulling the axles on this thing. Alright, so what I said was true. You technically don't have to take that bolt out and undo the strut there to get the axle out. However, if you actually want to get it out of the car like that, you do have to take that bolt out, and the reason being is that this end of it won't fit out just straight going out through the through this thing. You gotta unbolt that and play around with it and pull the control arm out of the way and move this all over the place, and it's a bit of a pain, but we got her done. Alright, we've making quite a bit of progress here since I last gave you guys an update. Of course, that's the one axle that we already got out, which you already saw. Now this is the other axle here, and as you can see, the first half of it is the same, but the second half is a little bit different. And so what I decided to do is, instead of trying to separate it from here, when I'm going to have to pull this end out of the transmission anyway, I decided just to pull it out all in one piece. And it was pretty much the same procedure as the other one, except for the fact that you have this carrier bearing here that's held up onto the motor by those 3 bolts. So what we did is we just, if I can find where they bolted to, they bolted up in here. So I just unbolted the 3 of them, and then once they were loose, what I actually used to get it out was my slide hammer over here. Anybody that watches my channel knows that I use this thing all the time. I think this is actually my favorite tool. Generally speaking, I don't pick favorites, but this is probably my favorite tool right here. I use this for everything. You guys have seen me do body work with it. I use this thing all the time, but I just put this thing on there. I was able to get that around the end of the outside of the carrier bearing here, and just a couple taps on it pulled this end out of the transmission. And my dad gave me a hand. That's the only thing about this. It's helpful to have somebody give you a hand to hold the steering knuckle and everything out of the way while you're working. Also took the drive shaft out, and in order to do that, it's a two-piece drive shaft. I just took it out all in one piece. So you just had your 4 bolts on each end of it, where it bolts to the pinion on both ends, and then you also have this another bearing here. So that was held in by 2 bolts up onto the roof here. So I undid that, and then there was one of these things. I only had to take one of them out because the bearing had to slide out through this thing. And then what I've been doing is, while I still got this thing up in the air, I've just been taking more things that I can see that need to be taken off down underneath of it. I disconnected the shifter. There's just a little tiny cover held on by 3 bolts that gave you access to that, and then all you do is pull the pin out, and then slide the pin out through shifter, and then you get that out of the way. I just tucked it up there for the time being. And then I unbolted the flywheel from the flex plate up here. I'm not sure how many bolts, but they're little 10 or 12 millimeter bolts. And what you got to do is you get yourself a big socket that fits on the end of the crank here, and you can rotate your crank. I pulled this thing out of the way too, but you can rotate your crank around and get to each one of those bolts. And it also helps. You can hold the crank as you're trying to loosen these, otherwise the whole thing wants to turn. So we got them out, and I think the only other 2 things I took out right now were this big bolt here. That's a main transmission to engine bolt, so we took that one out, and there was one other one right up in here, so we took that out. I think that's about it. Oh, one other thing. This bracket here, this is technically your transfer case, but it's all bolted to the transmission, and I'm just going to take it out in one piece. But there's a little bracket that runs from that thing up to the motor, held in by 2 bolts, so I took that out. But other than that, I think that's about it underneath the car. So what we're going to do now is we're going to lower this thing down and start taking care of stuff up top. Alright, so I've been working on top of this thing, trying to get everything out of the way. The first thing I did is I undid the battery, because I was going to be messing with the starter. That has to be unhooked. So I figured before I do anything, let me unhook the battery. And then once I did that, it's basically a matter of just looking around and finding things that need to be unhooked. I did the 2 transmission core lines. I got them held up out of the way, but they're just rubber lines with clamps on them. So you undo the clamps, slide the lines off. So I did that. There were 2 more bolts I took out. There was one that goes through right here, and then there was another one. Bit hard to see, but it goes in right down here. And then that was it as far as bolts that I did. Then, like I said, I just looked for connectors to undo. As I suspected, that big wire that I was talking about underneath, it was able to be undone right here with a big connector. So I undid that. I undid the starter. There was another wire going to it. This little bracket here gets bolted to the starter. So I undid that. Then you had a bunch of things off to the front. I undid all of them, and it's just a matter of looking around and making sure that every wire is disconnected from the transmission. So now what I'm getting ready to do is, we're at the point in time where as soon as I take the mounting bolts out of this thing, this transmission is ready to come out. The problem here is that the engine and transmission are bolted together in a line here, and a good portion of the engine's weight is kind of being spread apart and held up by the transmission motor mounts as well. So this is how we're going to hold up the engine. It's a bit primitive, but it's going to get the job done. Just took a ratchet strap, ran it all the way around the engine, made sure it actually was up against the engine as opposed to around the fuel rails and other said fragile items. We got a 4x4 running across the top here. Should distribute our load quite well. Again, we're not even holding up the whole weight of the engine. It's maybe about a third of it or so. Alright, so it's go time. We're about 20 minutes from having this thing out of here as far as I know. Ask me how I feel about that in 20 minutes. But anyway, as I said, pretty much the only thing holding this transmission to the car right now is the actual mounts. And so what I've done is I just went out and took out the two bottom ones. You look up in there, there's two very dark looking holes, one on top of the other. I just took them out, so they're not holding anything in. So as far as I know, the only thing holding the transmission in now is this mount right there, and then the two bolts on top of the transmission, as far as I can tell. So I think we're ready to drop this thing down. Like I said, I'm going to get like a couple cinder blocks, milk crates, some kind of rectangular rigid objects, and set them up down there for the transmission to sit on. Then go ahead and take those two bolts out there, take the two bolts off the top, and hopefully we can raise the car up off the transmission. Let's do it. Where we're at is that I took one of these bolts off, got the other one still on there a little bit, but that's not holding anything now. And then that other motor mount, we just unbolted with the two bolts, got both of them out of there. And so what I'm working on right now is I got my screwdriver here, and I'm just kind of working my way, separating the transmission from the engine. And we're getting pretty darn close here. There's just dowel pins going through the transmission and the engine for alignment and other purposes. So that's the only thing that's holding us up right now. Alright, so there you go. Transmission is out. That's all I really have to say about that. It was pretty easy. I didn't do everything in one day in one shot, but if I totaled everything up, it wasn't more than a couple hours really. And now that I've done it once, I could do it even faster than that probably. But yeah, we're done here. The transmission is completely out of the car, and I don't really have anything else to add to it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Now we just have to swap a couple things over to the new transmission. The starter, the transfer case, maybe a few other small things. You got to find a new motor mount too, because this one is not quite gone, but about to be gone next time you pull a hole shot like that. So I got to replace that. But other than that, we'll be putting this putting transmission back in this thing pretty soon. So we'll see you then. Thanks for watching, tubes.